Welcome all to my lecture on the origin of Heidegger's notion of Gestell. Now it's very difficult to speak of this, of course, in the English vernacular because there is no equivalent to this word in the English vernacular. Because this word is not arbitrary by Heidegger, he doesn't make it up. And it has a profound trajectory, a history that comes out of German idealism, which I will try to explain here. Because very often what you can see, be that in academic circles or in maybe on the internet, is that Gestell is just thrown around as if it's already clear what it means and where it comes from, or as if it's just one of these weird Heideggerian words that have just meaning within the Heideggerian cosmos. But no, there's something profound here at stake. And before I begin, I would like to encourage you to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, share the videos, and also to support the channel on Patreon or PayPal. There will be links just down there below. Now, again, Gestell is not an arbitrary word. It's not just something that Heidegger pulls out of thin air because it seems to sound nice for him. There's something there in the word that has to do with the history of metaphysics in modernity. Vorstellung is the word for German idealism. It's Kant, which is usually translated as representation, and so it comes from out of Kant, Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel that Heidegger arrives at Gestell, and I'm now trying to trace some of that. So Vorstellung means representation. To represent, to place something in front of myself, that's Vorstellung. And in stellen, which means to position, that's where you get the stellen from Gestell. Gestell is, in fact, the concentration of all positioning, which is why it's now often translated as positionality and no longer as enframing, because enframing sounds like something coming from the outside, whereas what Gestell is, because the being hides itself in, or not hides itself, but being is present in a concealed manner in the qua of the ens qua ens, beings as beings. It's in the as here, the as structure, that being lights up. So in our epoch, and Heidegger sees this, beings appear as a standing reserve, as resources waiting to be exploited. But he arrives at Gestell from Vorstellung, from his notion of Vorstellung, which is so prevalent in modernity, Repräsentatio, representation. In Being and Time, Heidegger already criticizes representationalism as an insufficient way of describing Dasein's being in the world. Even just as much as using a tool would be too complex for representation to be able to do it justice. When a tool like a hammer breaks, Heidegger argues, perception and representation fail Dasein. And I quote from Heidegger, even the most sharp and most persistent perception and representation of things could never discover something like damage to the tool. The using, the handhaben, which means to handle with the hand, must be able to be hampered so that something unhandy can be encountered. Heidegger here understands representation as the linear succession of mental images of an object. The current representation is constituted by the present now state. Hence, from an ontological perspective, representation cannot account for the interruption, the hampering of the tool, because all representation ever perceives is the object in its present now state. Representation does not disclose the being concerned in its being. Representation cannot account for what is between T1 and T2, as we so often are told that time is just T1, T2, T3, Tx. And therefore representation cannot synthesize the different time states on its own. What really takes place in moments of breakdown, which Heidegger takes as exemplary, according to Heidegger, is what he calls in English, it's translated as making present, in German it's gegenwärtigen. making present on its own is not inauthentic. Rather, the problem is when making present takes prevalence, then the horizons of futurity and having been begin to disappear. Dasein deals only with the immediately present rather than that which self-conceals and self-withdraws. Representation on its own only provides a successive stream of what is out there, but it cannot provide coherence. Representation and consciousness knows no unity of temporal ecstasies, Heidegger argues, but making present is of an ecstatic unity that awaits and retains. In order to repair a damaged tool, Dasein needs to make present what it has been and what it will be, and Dasein needs to do so simultaneously, for the tool to be made functional again. Ontologically, this is only possible out of the unity of the ecstasies of temporality. Dasein has to be out there in the world, deeply interwoven with the horizon of meaning against which the tool lights up in its being, and in this sense Dasein is used to handling the tool with its hands. Heidegger speaks of ready at hand and present at hand as modes of beings to be present and available to Dasein. Representation, by contrast, is a purely internal mental process of representing pictures. Representation is a distanced observational stance operating on the level of correspondence truth. Dasein's experience of being in the world is practical rather than theoretical in the modern scientific sense. Dasein uses tools with its hands, not with its mind. Tools are ready to hand, and Dasein does not need to represent them mentally in order to use them. In moments of breakdown, Dasein makes present a tool that is usually ready to hand. Thus, when in need of repair, something ready to hand becomes something present at hand. Only then does Dasein have to ask itself what the hammer is made of and how it could be repaired. With the scientific revolution of modernity, tools have become more complex, and so they are prone to break down more often than tools like a hammer. The more complex machines are, the more often they have to be repaired, and that means the more often they have to be made present. This shift in the tools available to human beings is not coincidental, but necessary as a consequence of the response modern metaphysics gives to the event. The abstract, not that which is ready at hand, becomes the new regulative idea. At the same time, the increased presence of modernity, most visible perhaps with the internet, of everything that has ever been recorded, can be stored and be made available at any place and time. A simulacrum thereof, of course, bears another problem. As Heidegger writes in Being in Time, when we just stare at something, this is a quote from Heidegger, our just having it before us lies before us as a failure to understand it anymore. This has to do with the movement of aletheia. If something is right in front of us, concealment, unconcealment, if something is right in front of us, oneself, and perfectly available at any time, then understanding as disclosing is, ironically so, impeded, made more difficult. Human beings must no longer engage in alethein, then in disclosing, when everything appears to be perfectly present and presented. In German, presented would mean vor einen gestellt, placed before someone. In the text Das Ereignis, Heidegger interprets vorstellen, this German verb, as follows. And perhaps I should write it down somewhere so it makes more sense. Just a second, getting a piece of paper. So when you look at the word Gestell, maybe that makes more sense. Gestell is written like this. Gestell. You see that? Gestell. And now we have vorstellen. This is the Stellen of vorstellen, to represent. And then of course we also have herstellen. Here. That means to produce. And nachstellen which means nachstellen, to imitate. So Gestell is not arbitrary. It's all the modes of stellen concentrated in one. What Gestell is such that it through us represents beings in their beingness as we represent them, in order to produce them according to this represented beingness. But it also chases after, imitates beings in their beingness, hence we live in this world of simulacra. And it also, again, produces everything according to representations. So in das Ereignis, in this text, Heidegger interprets vorstellen, that we just saw, as follows. And the English translation reads, to represent, vorstellen, making present of something as something. Here again, in the as, that's where being is always lurking. So for example, making present the world as an image, or more scientifically said, as a model. As Heidegger argues, in the age of the world picture, das Zeitalter des Weltbilds, the prevalent talk of world views, of the world as an image, as a picture, indicates the world is only, quote, insofar as it is positioned by the representing, producing humanity. Vorstellend, herstellende Menschheit. Everything is only, again, I say it again, insofar as it is positioned, gestellt, by the vorstellend, herstellend Menschheit, by the representing, producing humanity. Everything is only insofar as it is positioned by the human being as represented, produced. It's always in this mode of stellen. Max Planck points this out when he says, only what's measurable is real. And this is how you get to this madness of measuring happiness, which is or love, right? The neurologists who show the parts of the brain that apparently light up when we see someone that we love, and apparently that's love. But that's already so reduced to mere functionality that it's actually a lost battle, right? And someone that's that far gone into the realm of instrumental rationality and technicity. There's always an invitation to perhaps come back, but there's not much point of discussing with someone like this. In the same essay, which is The Age of the World Picture, Heidegger fully explores the manifoldness of the German verb stellen. The subject chases after and imitates, that's nachstellen as we saw, what it wants to represent, vorstellen. That means also to position before itself in order to produce herstellen, which literally means to position something at the place where it is needed. Quote from Heidegger again, to represent means here of oneself, to set something before one and to make what has been set in place secure, sicherstellen, as thus set in place. We can hear the subject breathing through this. Different than his account in Being and Time, Heidegger here appreciates that representation is not a simple picture of what is out there, but rather an interference with the world, an interference operating with calculation in order to secure the predetermined desired outcome. Beings are now only insofar as they correspond to the represented idea, Vorstellung, idea, image, imagination, representation, which could be, for example, a production plan, a blueprint, according to which then beings are produced as measured, equalized, equated, evaluated, and that is true for vegetables as much as it's true for human beings. This is the impoverished perspective of correspondence truth set to work. World access in modernity, primarily, if not exclusively, takes place by way of representation, which is predicated on the subject-object dichotomy. As representation means both picturing what is out there, imagining, right? All this talk about imagination is perhaps quite dangerous. What is out there? Representing what's out there, resemblance, and Vorstellen in the literal sense of positioning before oneself. World access now, first and foremost, takes place by preconceived representations. We call those models in science, or formats, a certain format. You can buy a romantic weekend, when we were still allowed to travel. You could buy a romantic weekend, which is the format of a romantic weekend before it's allowed to occur, as it would occur by itself. The logical consequence of this is, of course, that at some point there's no need for any actual travel or any actual experience, because it's so preconceived that all that needs to happen is the transaction cost is paid, and then we can leave that aside and let the algorithms run the course of this preconceived formatted experience or impression of the world. And the same is true for the sciences with their models, and which are interferences, which are imitating interferences with the world. Thus, nature is now first represented as an object of research, and subsequently nature is approached only as such. Nature must obey the subject's models. Now, but the picture of the world is not really a picture. It's a schematized version of it. It's an outline, it's a construction. And the mathematization of the world is a primary example. The process perhaps can be formalized as follows. A, which is the representation qua model by which nature is accessed, is posited in such a way that B, nature, must conform to A. Models by which human beings, that's the Procrustes bed of the sciences. Right? Anything that falls out of this Procrustes bed and doesn't fit in is not. As Max Planck says, I'll say it again, only what's measurable is real. And there's so much that goes into that one statement. For example, just even the word real is unquestioned here. So this is a prime example of the oblivion of the question of being. Because that's an ontological statement, right? To say that only what's measurable is real, that's an ontological statement. Models by which human beings interact with the world are precisely not mere representations qua resemblance of nature as it is itself or as it appears. They are rather transforming the very being in question. That's to say, nature is something present at hand. Heidegger's insight into the manifoldness of Stellen, together with his interpretation of vulgar time, of time as just passing by, that's what make his determination of the essence of technology as, that's what bring this interpretation of technology as Gestell, as the concentration of all modes of positioning, that's what brings this about. So now let's move on to Gestell, to the word Gestell itself. So the first step towards a clearer understanding of why Heidegger chooses the word Gestell to describe the essence of technology is via the word itself. The German word Gestell is a common word. A Gestell is a stand or supporting framework used, for example, in workshops or on farms. So it's a very common, or used to be a very common, German word. Until the second half of the 20th century, Gestell in southern German vernacular was also used to refer to machines like a circular saw, for example. Like a general thing that you have, a machine that would be electric or run with an engine or something. Yet this is not what Heidegger means by Gestell. By hyphenating the word, Heidegger, in a sense, frees the word from its immediate everyday meanings. The interruption of the hyphen lets us rest on the prefix and simultaneously brings to the fore the weight and meaning of the root verb stellen. Gestell is then the gathering of all modes of stellen, of placing, putting, positioning, setting up, producing, chasing, imitating, representing. Note also that the perfect tense, the past perfect tense in German of stellen is gestellt. As an adjective, gestellt can mean affected and artificial. The notion of Gestell is inspired by Eckart's Geställnis, Master Eckhart, a translation of the Roman forma and the Greek morphe. We always produce things according to preconceived forms, yes, but Gestell does something else. It operates by homogenizing and making uniform all forms, and that's how Gestell eradicates ownness, originality, and the possibility for spontaneous arising. To some degree, Gestell has always ruled. To some degree, right? Techne is always there. There's nothing evil about it. There's nothing nefarious about it. It just so is that through this prevalence of representation in modernity, this force of Stellen, Gestell is now becoming the most prominent, exclusive way of being in the world and interpreting beings. Now, Gestell is not to be understood as a general concept. It's not a genus, not a class, under which all technological beings are subsumed. A radio or a smartphone, a plane or computer are not Gestells like cows and birds and animals, for example, or like telephones and letters are means of communication. In that sense, the common English translation of Gestell as enframing could be misleading, since it implies that what technology essentially does is to enframe all beings, as if enframing came to beings from outside. This is why it's now very often translated as positionality, because it's not external to beings, but rather, and this is very important to understand, Gestell is not external to beings. It doesn't overpower us and doesn't subjugate us, etc. No, what it does is it's the way in which beings appear. It's in the beings as beings, and the as is now mostly Gestell. So it's not distinct from the presencing of beings, but it's the way in which beings presence in this era of replacement, of circulative replacement. Now it's important to point this out, is that Gestell is not some nefarious force coming from outside doing something evil to us. No, it's insofar as we are the locus of the history of being, we are enacting Gestell in our interpretation of beings as standing reserve. Beings appear as a standing reserve or standing resource waiting to be exploited, including the human being, precisely because beings now, thanks to Gestell and the as, appear as such. Insofar as modernity begins to interpret being itself as presence at hand, nature as presence at hand, as something that's perfectly available, and that can be made available, and that can be made to use, it can be made to function. So there's a certain analogous element here too that we have to maybe consider, that beings are analogous to Gestell. The old notion of analogy is very important here. In this sense, positionality, Gestell, is the essence, or I don't like the word essence actually, is das Wesen der Technik, is the dimension of technics. That's what Gestell is. So there's still difference between being and beings. We don't have to worry about this here. But when Heidegger speaks of the Wesen of technology, this is something else that's very important in Heidegger, is that this is usually translated as essence. But he does not use the word in the metaphysical sense. Wesen is not metaphysical. In the technology essay, the question concerning technology is the essay that we're concerned here now, Heidegger gives the examples in German of Staatswesen and Hauswesen. Staatswesen is state affairs, Hauswesen would be household matters or something like that. To illustrate what he means, in these cases the German word Wesen does not at all mean genus or essentia or essence, but instead, Heidegger says, means the ways in which house and state hold sway, administer themselves, develop, and decay. There is an old German saying that is often found still in castles and farmhouses, from Pommern to South Tyrol, and I have it here too, which reads, Mag draußen die Welt ihr Wesen treiben, mein Heim soll meine Ruhestadt bleiben. So if we translate Wesen here with essence, then this saying completely loses its meaning. Wesen here rather means something like weben und streben, weaving and striving. Note also that Wesen can mean to dwell, to linger. if we stick with the former meaning, then Heidegger, then the saying, here says something like, "May the world weave and strive, my home may be my resting place." But if we translate it, "May the world drive its essence," which is a literal translation, we would completely lose the meaning. There is in Wesen, this is what Heidegger does here, a relevant sense then of weaving and striving, and not the notion of essentia, or the scholastic translation of Greek ousia. So Wesen indicates a realm, as in Staatswesen, a realm in which the state comes into its own and administers itself, holds sway, and then at some point decays. A realm. That's what Wesen is. When Heidegger speaks of das Wesen der Technik, he doesn't mean does not say the essence of technology, but he says the realm that is opened up by techniques. And this is exactly this beings as beings structure, where beings are in a realm now in which they have to stand ready, are positioned, gestellt, as such as to be exploited. That's completely different from saying, oh, there's enframing that comes from the outside and beings are enframed and blah, blah, blah. And when that's the essence of technology, what is technology? No, that's not the question. The original question that Heidegger asks is what and how? How does technics sway? How does technics hold sway in our epoch such that techne is now so overpowering? And other modes of being, like the poetic mode of being, is now reduced. And even language is now reduced to just a transmitter of information. So, Wesen is a realm, a dimension, and refers to how this realm emerges, sustains and governs itself. And it's striking, I have to say, it's striking that in 70 years of this essay having been published, almost no one has taken the time, including German speakers who write on Heidegger in English, have taken the time or have thought it necessary perhaps to point it out that Heidegger does not mean essence. And that perhaps tells you something about this gatekeeping mechanism that academia is, because all of a sudden something else lights up. You begin to see Gestell, you begin to see positionality itself, because it's not some nefarious thing that is hiding somewhere. No, it's the oldest question, the question of being in our current epoch, that's lighting up the meaning of our epoch. Because that's what Heidegger always says. There is meaning, there is sense in the epoch of technics, if we ask the right question. Now, again, this, but also when you think about it, what he says about Staatswesen, about state affairs, about this realm of the state, in terms of the realm of techniques, how does it emerge? How does it administer itself? How does it hold sway? How does it rule? But also, how does it decline and decay? Which is to say that even techniques, even this all-powerful, seemingly all-powerful Gestell, is finite. Now, Gestell, or positionality, as the realm of techniques, is hence not a general whatness pertaining to all beings. Instead, positionality opens up a realm of possibilities such that things become circularly replaceable, including the human being. And the human being is in this precarious situation thanks to the cut of which we suffer, the cut that's being itself, that always throws us into the differentiating of being and beings and of concealment and unconcealment. We are the functionaries of techniques. Everyone is. And insofar, not because we use an iPhone or use a microphone, no. But because we interpret, understand beings as a standing reserve, as having to be readily available. Instead of having their own way, right? Instead of being liberated to be themselves. So, as the realm of techniques, that's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about when Heidegger speaks of das Wesen der Technik, not the essence of technology, not at all. So, this realm opens up certain possibilities. for being, in which beings are replaceable and circularly replaceable. The will to will shows itself. Now, to say that Gestell positionality is this fundamental destining of the coming to presence of being itself, hence does not mean that all beings are of the same metaphysical essence. Instead, the way beings are present is such that beings increasingly occur as positioned, as immediately ready for use and instantly replaceable. This is thus, and this is why, by the way, this is why everything has to be evaluated all the time. Go into a restaurant, click 1 star, click 3 stars, I like, I don't like. That's why. In order to perfect replaceability and timelessness, seeming timelessness. But that's for another time to discuss. And if you like, by the way, we can talk about this in private. Just reach out to me. I offer private philosophy tutorials if you'd like to know more and read these texts in the original on Heidegger or Hegel and others. Now, this is a seinsgeschichtliche understanding, right? Of being in its tidings. That's what we're trying to think after here. This dimension of technics, this realm of technics in which we dwell, or not really dwell, but in which we roam, perhaps. So in the essay, The Turning, Die Kehre, Heidegger articulates in full what he means by the word Gestell. I will read it in German first, and then the English translation. Das Wesen des Gestells ist das in sich gesammelte Stellen, das seine eigene Wesenswahrheit mit der Vergessenheit nachstellt, welches Nachstellen sich dadurch verstellt, dass es sich in das Bestellen alles Anwesenden als den Bestand entfaltet, sich in diesem einrichtet und als dieser herrscht. The English says, the dimension of Gestell, the realm of positionality, is this setting upon, gathered into itself, concentrated into itself, which entraps the truth, the aletheia, of its own coming to presence with forgetting. This entrapping disguises itself. Verstellen, again you have stellen here, verstellt, it dissimulates, to speak in a traditional language, in that it develops into the setting in order, organizing everything, that presences as standing reserve, establishes itself in the standing reserve and rules as the standing reserve. So the word Gestell is the culmination of the trajectory of modernity to represent the world as an image, and then by this image to interfere with the world again. There's something still lurking, there's something in Kant that I'll make another lecture on at some point, that shines forth here. Is Kant very clearly says that the objectivity of the world is of course predicated on the categories of subjectivity. And everything that is insofar as it's represented. And represented, of course, only representations of appearances. And those appearances are mirror plays of things in themselves to which there is no access, which are in the noumenon. And Heidegger sees exactly this as present in this realm of technics. Of course, the word technics is from techne, comes from techne, from the Greek word techne, which means art and craft. And we're always also technical beings. We use tools, etc. But now what's prevalent is that the interpretation of beings is now such that it's assumed that everything can be made to stand ready at any given moment, which is working against linear time. And this working against linear time, or ultimately what's lurking behind all of this, is a denial of death, is a denial of natural limitations. So thank you very much for listening. Please leave a comment, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and support the channel on Patreon that would be wonderful. Thank you very much.